Okay, that's better.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Audrey Kidwell with Volunteer Florida. Give us just a few minutes and we'll begin the presentation.
I still can't.
We can hear you now.
But I'm on my phone. And I told her I wanted to connect with my computer audio.
And it's not working.
Yeah, no, because I'm talking to you guys and you're not responding.
Let me see. Okay, I think I see you.
You see me?
All right, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Barbara, I'm glad that you're on. Hopefully that means that you still have power out in Pensacola. We are going to go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about a lot of things related to the Volunteer Generation Fund, hopefully everything you need to know to set you up for a really successful year. For those of you that are in your second or third year, parts of this will probably be similar to what you heard last year or to what you've experienced last year, so bear with us. Please also, if you have any questions, use the Q&A or the chat. We'll be monitoring it. And again, we're not going to be doing any breakouts or anything like that. So it should be just a pretty standard session. And then lastly, I also emailed everybody the activity just because there were too many handouts to put into this session. I emailed it this morning, probably around 9 a.m. So if you want to make sure that you have those handy, we're going to get to that towards the end of today's presentation. So I'm briefly just going to go over some Volunteer Florida stuff. Firstly, I'm really happy that the finance is on. I can see that a lot of our finance individuals have joined. So welcome. We're so glad you're here. Hopefully you joined a couple other sessions throughout. I know everybody didn't have the entire conference blocked off, but if you missed something, a lot of the sessions were recorded and will be available later for you as well. So welcome. Also really excited to welcome the Volunteer Florida finance staff. Many of you maybe haven't interacted with them in person, but over the phone or email. So super excited for you to meet Tracy Lambright, the Finance Deputy Director. She's been at Volunteer Florida for 6 years. And Clea McMillan, who is our financial analyst. I believe she's hitting her 1-year mark, like pretty soon, right? So they're going to be covering a lot of the finance piece of today's session. So I'm going to go, again, high level, like Volunteer Florida, moving into very specific VGF related things. So we use a system called Blackbaud Grant Making. It allows us to administer and track all of our requirements for you all throughout the year. The one thing to note is it's only one person that can have access to the specific grant for the 2021 year. So typically it's the program representative. Sometimes in the application period, it's like the grant writer. So if you were like, I think I should have control over that, you can connect with me after the training and we can get that situated. So the big thing to note about our system is that you've done 90% of the work in it already, which is really great, right? You've done your clarification, your application, you completed your exhibits, or will be completing them by Monday, and your pre-organizational assessment. So really the rest of the year, there's only 3 things left to do in it. It's a mid-year report, an end-of-year report, and then the post-organizational assessment. And then again, applying for next year if that is something that you choose. So again, want to go over the Exhibit 2 just because there's a lot of times the people who are the grant writers, they write the grant, they're getting it all ready. They may not share with the people who are actually running the volunteer programs what we're asking of you for the year and what your organization said that you would be doing. So again, just the target is 400 volunteers. Skills-based volunteers, and then 3,000 hours will be served amongst those 400 volunteers, not individually, but as a collective. And then organizations will participate in a pre and post test. So again, I can't share enough that this is the foundation of the year. So again, if you have not seen your application, please reach out to whoever wrote it or whoever signed the contract because they have copies, but I'd be happy to help you get that as well. We have our national criminal history check. Again, I'm not going to go through all of it because honestly, most of you have done it, which is a huge blessing on my end because you're all allowed to start charging your time once those checks have been adjudicated, which basically means you've done your 2-part check. I've reviewed them for a clear. That's what it, that here, it's like your name and the word clear. And then I am able to say that, great, you're ready to go for service. And I've emailed you all individually about when your time can start being charged to the grant. The only thing that I really like to note is that if in the mid-year you decide to add someone to the grant or that person that is currently there leaves, you'll want to make sure that we run another check before you start charging their time to VGF because I don't want to wait until the end of the grant to realize that you had someone switch mid-year. Typically, we know you're all really good at letting us know about if there's been a switch, and then typically we'll know also because your invoices will reflect a different name on the timesheet. But again, we want to make sure that we can spend this money fully at the end of the year and that you're on track to meet your financial obligations as well. And those background checks are usually the biggest barrier for anybody not meeting those financial obligations. Reporting guidance, again, there's a template in the contract package. I do send it out in the mid and the end of year. They'll be turned in online. And again, demographics, we will ask you. And the one thing we do want to make sure that you're collecting is the number of volunteers and the hours that they're serving. There's a bunch of other questions like number of baby boomers or number of volunteers in school or degree seeking. If you are collecting that, we would love to have that information. If you're not, or you don't have a way to start collecting it, we completely understand, and those are all optional. It really is the number of volunteers and those hours that we're looking for, along with some really great narrative. We ask a couple of questions about, the volunteer management practices, name of success, give us some really good data that we can share out. And when we have it, we share it. We will put it out on social media, through our external affairs department. We put it into reports to our federal funder, to other state commissions. We really love to share all of the good work that you're doing. So again, the best narrative and pictures that you can provide during the mid and end of year report really make it beneficial for us. And then again, just a reminder, the W-9 and the vendor EFT form is due on the 31st, which will be due on the 2nd, which is Monday, November 2nd. Again, everybody has to have a W-9. The vendor EFT form is optional. We highly recommend it because it allows for the direct deposit. But if your organization has a policy or prefers to receive a paper check, you just don't need to fill that out. But please let me know so then I can stop harassing you to turn in your vendor EFT form. And then the key concepts of financial grant management, again, needs to be completed by the 31st or as it's in Blackbaud, Monday, November 2nd. Again, one person per organization just needs to take both trainings. The Exhibit 9 has the hyperlinks to the actual training, so you don't need to type in the Excel up there. But again, please make sure that you're getting these done because I have to go through and make sure that they're all compliant. They're all, done, and it just helps if they're done in a timely manner. So again, just some high level things that are like being turned in between now, like, you know, a couple weeks ago until Monday. And then a lot of people ask, like, what happens after training? Like, usually we'd be in Orlando, and this would be, you know, we'd spend 3 lovely days together, and I'd get to meet you all in person. And then I kind of don't really see you all in person again for the grant year. So after training, again, this year's different because it's virtual. So hopefully you'll be seeing me virtual for a long time. But after training, you'll get an electronic evaluation, which is actually going to be done through this system, Bravura. And then probably next Monday or Tuesday, I'll be sending an email out. With all of the presentations from the different sessions, along with like a sample timesheet and information like that. So, you know, all of this kind of the stuff that you've gotten through this 3-day training, I'll make sure to synthesize it into like one area for you to be able to easily download and access. Some of the recordings, though, may or may not be there. It was just dependent upon the presenter if they wanted to share the recording or not. So we have that after training. Again, I've talked about reports many times. I like to, like, you know, mention it so people aren't like caught off guard that we're asking for reports. They're not cumbersome at all. You know, they shouldn't take very long. And then I do site visits. Normally I would be like, hey, I'm going to come visit in person. But shout out to Lakeland Volunteers in Medicine. They, in July, approached me about doing a virtual visit. And I thought it was great. We had, like, you know, we did a half hour, 45 minutes of kind of talking about the program stuff. And then they gave me a tour of their space. And I really loved it. So I'm probably going to start setting up virtual site visits probably early in the year, just because who knows if we'll be able to travel due to the pandemic, or even, you know, our office may not have a travel policy, like a no travel policy. So just to be safe, I really want to see your organizations. And so this is probably the best way to do it for right now, is to setting up virtual ones. They're pretty painless. I send you all the questions I'm going to ask in advance so you can have everything prepared. And then again, like, I've met volunteers. If we were in person, I was a part of a volunteer project once when I did a site visit. And I'd also want to mention that it could be also opened to the larger Volunteer Florida staff. Like, if you're interested in ever having our CEO, Clay Ingram, come, or our National Service Director, Kat Keene, or Jovita, who helped plan this conference, our National Volunteer Department, you know, we can come to your volunteer celebrations. We can hop on a Zoom, you know, meet and greet, like, you know, virtually everything is, you know, sky's the limit. So please think about the ways that you can interact with Volunteer Florida, even outside of just a traditional site visit. And then kind of the last things that I'll touch upon that's going to happen through this year is, as I mentioned on the first day, and you got to meet Sue in the last session before the keynote, is we're going to be doing our year 3 of our impact study. And so we'll be sending out these surveys to each of the program and the CEO contacts probably around May. That's typically when we like to send it. And then she actually administers it all. I'll just send an email saying, like, hey, it's coming. And then for some reason, if, you know, your email bounces or something, she'll let me know and I'll find the correct contact. But all of your answers and anything that you do provide through the survey goes to her, and then she synthesizes that to us and gives us a report. So, so just letting you know that that's coming. Again, year 3, we want to kind of like have this 3-year study of how we're helping organizations with their volunteer management practices. We are going to have a webinar series. We typically have 4 to 5 each year. Last year, we had one presenter who spoke throughout the 5 different sessions. He kind of broke up a really large, like, in-person training to 4 or 5 smaller sessions. The dates are TBD, but usually by January, I'll be sending out the dates to all of them. If you're able to make it, that's really wonderful. They're not required, but it's just an extra way to engage with your fellow grantees in this group. And if you have other people in your organization that work with volunteers, it can be also a really great webinar for them to join. I do want to mention our media and outreach. We try at Volunteer Florida to share your successes as many times as possible. So some of the ways that we do that is through our service spotlight. Our external affairs department has a pretty robust schedule of who she's reaching out to. She tries to match, you know, organizations with certain months based on maybe what that month is known for. And so, again, I'll email you directly if I need like a quote or a picture or anything like that. We do in April 30 and 30. It's the volunteer, it's the Florida Recognition Month. National Volunteer Week is 1 week in April, but for Volunteer Florida, we like to celebrate the whole month just because we have so many great organizations. So again, we send out the information and you can nominate a volunteer to be highlighted. It's really great. We do VGF week in the summer. Again, the dates always kind of slightly change. So it'll be, probably June 2021. But again, many ways. We have an annual report. We like to have people come to the Capitol occasionally, again, when we were in person to help with events. So again, we love to help share your story. And then because we're about to turn it over to finance, I don't want to let you guys forget that financial invoicing is always due the 15th of each month. And just, as a reminder, send out a nice little note, mouse pad that has it on there. So, when you're like, man, it's the 15th of the month, what should I be doing? You can look down at your mouse pad. Just kidding. But I am now going to turn it over to Tracy Lambright.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Everything Finance. Finance is fun. Yay. I want to say congratulations to all of you on your award. We're so excited for another great year, and we're happy to have you with us today. So today, just to kind of go over, we're going to go over some grant responsibilities and requirements. And then towards the end, we're going to have a hands-on activity to help give you all a feel for how the monthly invoices should be put together, what the calculations look like, what we're looking for with the required supporting documentation for all the expenses that are charged to this grant. As mentioned earlier, if you have any questions while we're going to be going through the presentation and the activity, if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat. And we will periodically answer those questions throughout the training. So let's get started. Next slide, please. So just a quick question for you. Who is responsible for managing this grant? That's right. Everyone within your organization has the same role in managing this grant. The keys to financial compliance start with making sure that everyone has read through your standard contract and contract provisions and are familiar with all reporting requirements. They should also be familiar with your approved budget and what expenditures are allowed under this grant. The budget is an integral part of your contractual agreement with Volunteer Florida and allows you to perform and support the tasks that you've described in your program application. The budget is used to ensure compliance and conformance to grant provisions and also helps monitor your program's progress by comparing your budget to actual expenditures. Other keys to compliance include being familiar with OMB and Code of Federal Regulations as they relate to grant guidelines, paying attention to all due dates. Again, the 15th of the month, you're going to probably hear that about 15 times in this presentation. So pay attention to all due dates and required reporting, and be familiar with all contract exhibits. All the exhibits were a part of your contract package and are available to you through Blackbaud. As a quick note, as you know, this grant is considered to be a cost reimbursement grant. This means that you will provide monthly reimbursement invoice requests to be reimbursed for your expenditures. This means that costs will need to be paid for prior to requesting reimbursement for them and should be claimed within the month they are paid for. So I'm going to go over a quick example on that. So say you purchased your database software on October the 15th, you received your invoice on October 25th, and you paid for that invoice on November the 1st. Since the cost for the database expense was paid for on November the 1st, this means this becomes an expense for the November invoice. Another example, say payroll. You worked time in October 15th to October 30th, but payroll was paid on November 1st. Even though your time was worked in the month of October, because it was paid in November, those expenses for payroll will be requested on your November invoice. You will add expenses to the invoice and the month in which you pay for them. You will see more of this as we go through our activity after we get through the presentation. So let's keep going. Next slide, please. Another key to contract compliance is completing the 2 required trainings as Audrey discussed earlier. Certificates of completion are required to be submitted before any reimbursements will be issued. So please be sure that you complete these trainings and get these certificates in. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. All right, so this goes over information on why would you want to comply. So non-compliance with grant requirements and regulations can have consequences, such as audit findings, payback for unallowable costs, and the potential for a federal debt to be issued. If you consistently submit invoices late, this could result in a delay of reimbursements or even forfeiture of those reimbursements. And the same if your invoices are submitted incorrectly or without proper supporting documentation. If you are ever unsure whether the documentation that you are providing will meet the requirements, please reach out to us prior to submitting so we can discuss and resolve any issues before your invoice is due. All right, next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Kalia.
All right, hello everyone. Sorry about that. I was having trouble navigating the unmute button. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what it means to be allowable under the grant. To be allowable, costs must be included in your approved budget. So you've already submitted your budgets. These are pretty specific and detailed. If the item you're requesting reimbursement for is not listed in your budget, it's not an allowable item. It must be reasonable and allocable for the performance of the award. Essentially, that means the item is relevant to the grant and the cost is reasonable. Must conform to grant award limitations or cost principles. It has to be consistent with policies and procedures that apply to both federally financed and other activities of the organization. So it must be in accordance with your policy that you follow. It has to be given consistent treatment within the entire organization. That again means it has to be in line with your policies and procedures. In accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP principles, not be included as a cost or used to meet cost sharing or matching requirements of any other federally financed program. That is pretty self-explanatory. And you'll hear us talk about this a lot, must be adequately documented. We like to say if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So always remember to document things as much as you possibly can. Next slide, please. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about time and activity. And essentially, this page is referring to timesheets and your method of timekeeping. Nonprofit organizations must have a timekeeping system in place that tracks time and activity on an after the fact basis that accounts for total time. So in this bullet, notice the word total. That means timesheets should account for all hours worked within a pay period, whether they were worked on the grant or outside of the grant. And after the fact means, of course, personnel and supervisors should only be signing and dating their timesheets after all of the listed hours have been completed. Next bullet is it's signed and dated by employee and supervisor, is prepared at least monthly and coincides with one or more pay periods, and must have a certification statement. This statement should be along the lines of, I certify that this timesheet is accurate and true to the best of my knowledge. And timesheets are required for this grant, even if it's not your standard operating procedure to use them. We do have a template that meets all of the requirements on this page. If you'd like to use it, feel free to request this from us. Next, time and activity may be supported by a system of internal control, which provides reasonable assurance that the charges are accurate, allowable, and properly allocated. That can be an outside system like ADP is something that is used a lot, or a system that's incorporated into the official records of the grantee. All right, next slide. So match requirements, this will be a pretty basic and easy slide to understand. The match requirements for the 20 to 21 contract year has been waived per CNCS. That means there is no need to list any match on monthly invoices or provide any supporting documentation pertaining to match. Next slide, please, and I'll turn it back over to Tracy.
All right, great. Thank you, Kalia. Now let's talk about budget analysis. Budget analysis is very important when managing a grant. You will want to review your budget to actual expenditures on a continual basis to ensure that you are in compliance. And this will also help you avoid any budget overruns and shortfalls. This will also help you maximize the use of your funds. I wanted to let you know that here at Volunteer Florida, we also hold budget to actual meetings with Audrey on a monthly basis to keep her up to date on where you all are on spending down of this grant, where you should be performing each month, and to help her assist you guys with identifying any potential issues. She will share that information with you on a monthly basis and also provide any assistance that you may need. We highly recommend that if you do not already have a process in place, that you incorporate one to help manage and oversee this budget. This will help you, again, foresee any issues that may arise and help you see if you need to move any funds around within the budget so that you get the best use out of your funds and so that you have an opportunity to maximize them. All right, back to you, Kalia.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's go over some important dates. The grant period, of course, started this month, October 1st, 2020, and it ends September 30th, 2021. Items due by the 15th of each month, and I'll go over this a little bit more in detail next slide, but the monthly invoices, PER, that also stands for Periodic Expense Report, and the associated supporting documentation. Your first monthly invoice for the month of October is due November 15th, and future invoices are going to follow the same pattern. So all of the November invoices are due December 15th, December invoices are due January 15th, and so on and so forth. Items due 45 days after the contract period ends, that's the final financial reports and closeout. And so that will be November 14th, 2021 as of today. Next slide, please. All right, like I said I would go over in more detail. Items due by the 15th of each month, that's the monthly invoice. We definitely want to hammer that in. It is, like Tracy brought up earlier, incredibly important for the consistency of funds being released that you submit these on time and consistently. The more consistently you submit these invoices to us, the more consistently we're able to review them, and the more consistently we're able to release those funds to you. Let's talk again about the final invoice and supporting documentation. Remember that the September 2021 invoice is not the final invoice. And the final invoice is primarily going to be utilized to request reimbursement for items that were expended during the grant period but were overlooked and not added to the monthly invoices. Maybe you forgot, maybe you thought they were associated with another grant and got them mixed up. Items that were removed from prior invoices due to lack of supporting documentation, but adequate documentation has now been found. You can always add those back to the final invoice. Items that were procured after the contract expiration date, but are still eligible for reimbursement. For example, payroll or benefits for hours that were worked within the grant period, but are being paid for after the grant period. Essentially, the final invoice is a program's final chance at requesting reimbursement for their expenses. All right, next page. All right, invoice processing steps. So as we've said, invoices are due the 15th of each month. And Volunteer Florida contractually has 45 calendar days to review an invoice. Once we have reviewed that invoice, the program, we will reach back out to you with requested revisions or clarifications, and the program then has 5 business days to submit revisions back to the Volunteer Florida office. If revisions are not received back within the 5 days, Volunteer Florida will revise the invoice based on costs they deem allowable and the supporting documentation and issue a check for those allowable costs. So if we reach out to you and we say, we need supporting documentation for this pay period, but 5 business days pass and we haven't received that supporting documentation back, we will take out all of the expenses associated with that missing documentation and process the invoice as is. If there's an expense that you believe we should have additional justification to explain purchase, please include in the invoice submission. So the more documentation, the better. And again, document, document, document. If it's not in writing, if it's not provided to us as supporting documentation, then as far as we know, it didn't happen. So plain and simple, if you're unable to provide supporting documentation for an expense, we are unfortunately unable to reimburse it. Let's go to the next slide, and we can talk about the required documentation for your PERs, your invoices. Part 1 is the personnel expenses. Timesheets, like we said earlier, they must be signed and dated by employee and supervisor. They have to clearly note the VGF hours, and they have to have a certification statement included. The documentation that we accept for proof of payment can be a payroll register or a copy of salary warrants, pay stubs. And the documentation must include pay period dates and pay date, just so we're able to confirm the correct month that it should be invoiced for. And I also want to point out that general ledger reports are not allowable for payroll and won't be accepted. Like I said, it needs to be payroll registers or it needs to be pay stubs. Next slide, please. So we're going to move on to personnel fringe benefits. A lot of these are pretty similar to the payroll documentation, but we need payroll registers or copy of salary warrants showing the FICA withholding. We need invoices for healthcare and other benefits with complete listing of employees and premiums paid. So those do need to be itemized invoices. It can't be an invoice that says we're invoicing you for 5 employees and $500. We need to be able to verify employee A has a premium of $200. Employee B has a premium of $100. It does need to be separated and itemized by employee. And proof of payment for these invoices, we accept copies of checks, ACH debit receipts, bank statement clearly showing the payment clearing account. Next slide, please. We have database software. The supporting documentation required for this. Of course, we need an invoice. We have to be able to clearly identify all of the purchases made and detailed receipts, as detailed as possible, really specifying what this software is, what it's being utilized for, and proof of payment, just like the personnel fringe benefits, copies of checks, ACH debit receipts, and bank statement clearly showing the payment clearing account. Those are all options. And if you are making purchases for this software via credit card, we'll need a copy of the credit card statement and proof of the payment for the card. So your credit card statement and a check to your credit card company showing that statement was paid, or a bank statement showing that that credit card was paid. Whatever works easiest for you. And I can go ahead and turn that back over to Tracy and we can move to the next slide.
Thank you, Kalia. All right, now we're going to talk about budget revisions. So throughout the year, you may find that you have a need to complete a budget revision request form to move around some funding to better serve your program. The budget revision request form is part of your exhibits within your contract package. The form will need to be filled out and approved prior to charging any new expenses. It is in Excel, and so there are formulas built in for you. Once you enter your original budget numbers and input your increases and decreases, the revised budget section will automatically calculate your new approved budget. A few things to remember is if you're going to submit a budget revision request form, please be sure to fill out the top of the form with your lead agency program name and date the revision was submitted, as well as sign and date the form at the bottom before submitting to us. Audrey, are you able to pull up the form for us to take a quick look? Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so as you can see across the top, there are 3 sections. You've got original budget sections, you've got budget changes, and then you also have revised budget. So in the original budget section, the numbers that you will need to input will come directly from your originally approved budget. In the budget changes section, this is where you will enter your increases and decreases that you want to make. You will also need to include a justification for those changes that you are including in the revision in the far right column under justification. Please also note that the section totals in the middle section should total 0 in these columns. You should be decreasing your funds as a negative number on some lines and increasing your funds as a positive number in other lines. You are just moving around numbers so that your increases should equal your decreases. The bottom line CNCS totals in your original budget columns and the revised budget columns should not change. So this means that if you are originally approved for a $15,000 budget and you want to say you're not going to get database software and you're going to put that the funds that you originally expensed to database software up to personnel, your revised budget column should still reach the $15,000. Once all the numbers have been entered, again, the revised budget section will calculate automatically for you. And once approved, this will now be your new budget. So if you need to do a second revision, you will need your revised budget numbers from your approved budget revision, which will now become your original budget numbers, and so on. So when you start to fill out your second revision, the original budget numbers come from the revised columns. You enter your increases and decreases, and the new revised budget will now be your original revised budget, and so on. You will then, since we want to be sure that you are fully able to utilize and expend all of your funds to help maximize your program, we allow for a total of 4 budget revisions within the contract year. Also, the last deadline to submit any budget revision request form to Volunteer Florida will be June the 1st. Please be sure that all budget revision requests are submitted directly to Audrey, your program manager, for her approval. All right, thank you, Audrey. Can you go back to the slides? And you can advance to the next slide. Okay, and that slide's just going over you're allowed 4 maximum budget revision requests within a year. Again, that should be submitted directly to Audrey. If we also have in here the 5 business days. So if Audrey has any questions and needs to come back with you for justification or information, we need you to please respond within those 5 business days so that we can get an approval and get that that budget revision for moving for you. If we do not hear, that revision will be voided and you'll have to resubmit with the information requested. All right. All right, so questions. And if you'll just move to the last slide real quick, I just wanted to say that this last slide includes contact information for the staff at Volunteer Florida that'll be managing this grant. So if at any time you have any questions or need assistance, please don't hesitate to contact us, as we will always be happy to assist you, and we look forward to another successful year. So at this time, I would like to find out if there were any questions. Audrey, were there any questions that we needed to take at this time before we move on to the activity?
Yes, let's do some. And I will say, in addition to helping you guys build a good volunteer program, I also want you to spend your money. I know that it's an important resource for you and your agencies. And so I try not to be a bother, but I like to send as many emails as possible to remind you to spend this money. So every month I'll send out a, hey, don't forget to submit your invoice on the 15th. If you forget, I will follow up a couple days after. Also really good at, like, as Tracy said, I'll send out monthly emails on where you're at, you know, percentage wise on unexpended funds. And then typically by July, when we notice that your agency might have like critical unspent money, we would probably schedule a call to talk about how we can help in assisting that. A lot of times it's honestly is due to match, but because match is waived this year, I imagine it'll be a very smooth process for most of you. But again, I really want you all to spend your money. So we'll be having plenty of financial conversations throughout the year. And again, for those of you that are new to Volunteer Florida, the first month can seem very overwhelming with invoicing, but like, we are here for you. And then typically after the first or second month, it goes really smoothly. So just let us know. And if you need help, like, you can send me a copy in advance and I can help look through the invoice with you. Anything to that if you're nervous about submitting for the first time. But we did have some questions. So someone asked, the individual who is working on this grant is salaried and not required to submit a timesheet. Will a timesheet still be required?
Yes, timesheets are a requirement of the grant and will be required. So we do have a sample timesheet that we can provide to any grantee that does not have a timekeeping or a timesheet that they are currently using that they can use for the purpose of this grant. But yes, timesheets are required and will need to be turned in for those salaries to be claimed on the grant.
Yes. And I will send out, again, in the after action email next week, a copy of it in Word. I'll send out like a sample of kind of what we're looking for non-VGF and VGF hours. And I also have an Excel version, thanks to Dennis with Big Bend Hospice for sharing that last year. He was able to get it set up in an Excel. And we do accept an electronic signature. Correct, Tracy? Yes, because many of you might be working remotely.
Yep.
The next question is about a database documentation. We need an invoice and a receipt, or simply the receipt and then proof of payment.
So what we're looking for, and as we go through the activity, we've got some documentation. We'll be able to walk you through what it is we're looking for on that. But what we're looking for is a detailed, something that details to show us what was purchased. Typically in a receipt, could be a credit card receipt, doesn't tell us much information except for how much you paid and the date you paid it. So an invoice from them showing, the date and how much it was and what it was that was purchased is really what we're looking for.
So I had mentioned total hours are all hours, not just VGF hours. So the way the timesheet works is like, so if you have an 8-hour day, let's say you did 3 hours of volunteer related work that you're doing for VGF, and then the other time is not. Maybe it's fundraising or something outside of the scope of the volunteer world. You wouldn't charge that time. We just want to make sure that, if your 40-hour work week, how many of those hours were dedicated to this grant. Again, some of you are working 100% on it, so we would see 40 out of 40 hours. Some of you might have other things or other grants you're being charged to. So you want to make sure that, that you're not like double dipping that. So again, each agency is slightly different on how that person's being charged to the grant. But yes, we do need to see, and the way the timesheet works is that I believe we have a sample that we'll show in the activity in a few minutes. Yep. It'll auto total that it'll say, 40 hours this week, and 10 of those hours were related to VGF. And typically, if you are, as long as you aren't lobbying, fundraising, or proselytizing, typically all of those other volunteer hours are acceptable. There's a question about a contract employee. He doesn't get paid on payroll, but by invoice, and his hours worked is in that document. Do you still need a timesheet?
With a contracted employee, as long as you provide a copy of the contract that, kind of lays out, most of the time with a contract employee, there's a certain amount of hours that employee is going to work. Attaching a copy of something that details the hours would be fine. We're still going to need some type, something that shows when it was, the date it was paid and how much it was paid for. I mean, if they're going to be an hourly employee, all that'll be in the contract. So we'll want a copy of that contract as well.
The next question is about the electronic signature. It's fine to just type in their name. You don't need to go through DocuSign or some other form of like legal signature, or if they have like, like a copy of their like actual signature as a photo, you can import that as well. Whichever is easiest for your agency. And again, if you're in person, a physical signature works just as fine.
Yes.
And then the last question is if the employee is 100% of her time, but her salary is higher than the grant amount, should I put the grant amount in the salary box or just 100% of her time?
Can we get back to them on that, please?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. We just need a little bit more information before we formulate a response, and we'll work with you to get the information the way it needs to be.
Okay, so we can switch over to our activity. I'll stop sharing the screen. And if we want to take a how are you doing? There's some reactions at the bottom. How are you feeling about this session and invoicing? Thumbs up if you're like, I think I got it. Thumbs down is like, I could use 100 more sessions on how to invoice. Clappy hands. Hopefully no one does the laughing cry emoji. Let us know how you're feeling right now as I switch over to the activity. It's going to take me just a few seconds.
Looks like we've gotten mostly thumbs up so far, so that's good. So we're going to get, we're up to 9, 10 thumbs up and a few rounds of applause. So that's a great place to be.
Absolutely.
So that means all of your invoices are going to be perfect every single time with the exact right documentation every single time.
Absolutely. Don't be nervous. We've got your back.
Okay, so I have my screen shared. So as you walk through the documentation, Tracy, I'll be bringing it up. And then everybody, I also emailed a link to this so you can download it on your computer as well.
All right, great. Well, let's get started. So this activity has been created to help assist you with creating a monthly reimbursement invoice. We are going to discuss what information we're looking for in the supporting documentation that must be submitted with each invoice. We will run through how to calculate the amounts, the expenditures that can be claimed on the monthly invoice based on the documentation provided. And we will fill out a PER form that will need to be submitted with each invoice. So let's get started. So first thing is the budget. If you can pull up just the, I think it's down towards the bottom, the actual approved budget. Yep. So we've got a fictitious company, and it is Tracy and Rochelle's Awesome Services at Volunteers RS. Please note, if you can see that, there are only 2 staff members that are allowable on the grant. So we've got Tina can do it and Jamie is doing it, both our Director of Volunteer Programs and Volunteer Management Specialist. Please ignore the grantee share. We used the same one last year, and last year grantee share was part of the grant. This year it's not. So we're not even going to look at that section. So just disregard that from this budget. So what we're using this budget now for the purpose of this activity is we want to know what we have budgeted for. So we are gathering our expenses and our documentation, and we see that we have budgeted for personnel. We have also budgeted for FICA. We have budgeted for health insurance, workers' comp, and retirement. But please note, if you look in the budget, we have only budgeted the health insurance and the workers' comp and the grantee share. So those expenditures will not be able to be claimed as reimbursable expenses according to this budget. So what we will be charging to this budget are personnel salary, FICA, retirement, and database software. Okay. So as we move along, I'm going to be going through some documentation with you, some timesheets, payroll, and we're going to fill out a periodic expense report, as we call it, the PER. It's been called a lot of things, but that is the form that you will submit with every invoice. It's going to note what your request for reimbursement is based off of your documentation. And then you're going to include all of the documentation with that invoice to us on a monthly basis. So Audrey, will you pull a copy of that up? Thank you. All right, so as you can see, it basically looks just like your approved budget form. It's got your section 1 personnel expenses, your 2 lines for your 2 staff members, if that's what you budgeted for. Section 2's got all of your other personnel fringe benefits, and section 3 is your database software. And we're going to fill this out based on what expenditures were paid for in the month of October. So this is going to be an October invoice. So at the top, you're going to fill out your lead agency and program name. And then for your invoice dates, as Kalia stated, your October invoice that's going to be due to us on November the 15th will be for the period of October 1 to October 31st. So on this one, you're going to put 10/1/20 to October 31st, 20. Okay. All right, so looking at our budget, we know that we budgeted for 2 employees. We budgeted for Jamie and Tina. So in this section, you're going to enter their name and their title. I'm just waiting for Audrey there. There you go. And Audrey on the screen is going to fill out the PER form as we go along, as we finalize our calculations to keep the running total so we can see the full invoice once we're finished. All right, so let's jump in. Personnel expenses. Let's go ahead and pull up the timesheet for Jamie. Jamie 1. And for those of you who have had a question about the timesheet, this is a copy of our sample timesheet that we can provide to you. The information that we're looking for in a timesheet is the employee's name. We're looking for the pay period start and end date. We're looking to make sure that the time entered is for those same dates. So if it says October 1 to October 14, we are looking that in the timesheet that it's actually for October 1 through October 14. We are looking to see which hours are allocated to the Volunteer Generation Fund. VGF is what I will probably use from now on. As you can see on our timesheet, It's got a line for VGF, and then we have a line for administration. This employee splits her time between 2 different grants. And so her administrative time is recorded on one line, and her volunteer generation fund grant time is recorded on the other. At the bottom, you can see that it is totaled her 80 hours in that pay period, and that 40 of those hours are directed to the VGF program. We're also looking that the timesheet has the certification statement, so you can see the certification statement at the bottom. And then you can see that the employee and the supervisor have both signed the form, and both of their signature dates are after the pay period. Those are all the things that we're looking for when we look at a timesheet. So whenever you're looking at your documentation, to submit to us, you have an idea of what it is we're looking for. All right, so we're going to note for Jamie that she has worked 20 hours in this pay period, and I apologize, there's an error there. That total VGF hours should say 20. So she worked 20 hours in this pay period. Now, Audrey, if you'll please pull up her pay stub. Jamie 1. All right, so this is Jamie's pay stub for pay period 1. It shows the employee's name, and it shows the pay period dates, the date the payroll was paid, how the payroll was paid, and you'll see it says direct deposit and gives us a check number, and how many hours were paid, what the rate paid was, and also shows the tax withholdings. The first thing we need to look at to ensure that this payroll was paid in the month of October. Since it was paid on 10/15, we can include this expense on the October invoice. So now we're going to calculate the allowable amount of her salary. So remember from her timesheet that she worked 20 hours applicable to the VGF grant. From her pay stub, you can note that she is an hourly employee and gets paid $16.82692. So we will take the 20 hours times that rate, and you'll get a total of $336.54. Now let's look at the next pay period. Audrey, please pull up the timesheet 2 for Jamie. All right, so we see on Jamie, this is the timesheet from 10/15. In just a moment. 10/15 to 10/28. And that she worked during this pay period 25 hours on VGF. Okay, now let's pull her pay stub, Jamie pay stub 2. Right, again, we're going to look at the number 1. We're looking for name, we're looking for pay period dates. The pay period dates match, but look at the pay date. The pay date says November the 2nd. So because this payroll was paid in November, we cannot include this expense on the October invoice. You will need to claim these expenses on the November. Remember what we stated, you may only claim expenses on the invoice that were paid for within that month. So going back to the PER form, for Jamie, the total amount of salary that we can claim for her is $336.54. And on the PER form, you will only be utilizing the CNCS columns. Those are your reimbursable request expenses. Okay, so now we're going to go over to Tina. All right, sorry, and I apologize. There is an error there as well. The total VGF hours should only be 10. All right, so looking at Tina's timesheet again, this is the October 1 through October 14. We've got the hours, we have 10 hours and the pay period. So now let's pull up Tina's pay stub number 1. All right, so we're going to note here again, it's got the name, it's got the pay period beginning and end date. We got the pay date of 10/19, so it was paid in the month of October, so we can include this in the pay period. All right, so this time we're going to note that Tina is actually a salaried employee. So when we have a salaried employee, what you will need to do is you will need to calculate a percent of time based on the hours worked. So since she worked 10 hours out of 80 hours towards the VGF grant, you're going to take the 10 divided by 80 to get 12.5% of time. You'll then take her salaried amount of 4583.33 times the 12.5%, and you're going to get a total of $572.92. This is the amount that you can claim for Tina for this pay period. Now, again, since we've already looked at Jamie's timesheets and payroll, we know that the second payroll was paid in November. But I would like to walk you through, even though our invoice does not have health insurance on the reimbursable share, I'd like to walk you through how to calculate based on percentages of time. So let's go ahead and pull Tina's timesheet 2. Okay, and if you look at timesheet 2, it shows 40 hours, which is 50% of her time. So for the month of October, we would average the 12.5% and the 50% of time together to get an average percentage of 31.25%. If you are claiming fringe benefits, you would take all of those fringe benefits by that 31.25% to calculate the allowable costs that can be claimed on the grant based on her hours worked for that month. Now, going back to Jamie, because she was an hourly employee, we did not calculate a percent of time for her. So you would have to go back and calculate a percent of time based on the number of hours that she worked on the grant. So in the first pay period, we saw that she worked 20 hours, which is 25%. And then her second pay period, she worked 25 hours, which is 31.25%. So if we average those together, her total fringe benefit percentage rate would be 28.125%. All right, so going back to the PER form for Tina for payroll, the total amount that we can claim for her is $572.92. All right, so now we're done with section 1. So moving to section 2, as you saw from the approved budget that we looked at in the beginning, we only budgeted for FICA expenses for these employees under the reimbursable share. So to calculate FICA, we're going to take Tina's total salary and Jamie's total salary that's claimable in section 1, and we're going to multiply those by 0.0765, which is the rate for FICA. And we're going to record those in each. There you go. We're going to record those in each section. So if you notice, there's 2 different sections in section 2, one for employee 1 and one for employee 2. So you'll enter the employee 1's name under individual, and then on the FICA line item. So for Jamie, we're going to take 336.54 times 0.0765. We're going to get $25.75. And then for Tina, we're going to take her total salary of $572.92. And we're going to multiply that times 0.0765 to get $43.83. So note, this PER form is going to be in Excel, so it will have formulas and it will calculate totals for you. All right. And so I'm also going to, even though this is not part of, because it was grantee share, I do want to go through a calculation for health insurance based on those percentages that we just calculated, just to, in case you did budget for that on your reimbursable side, so you can see how those calculations are made. So Audrey, if you can please pull up the health insurance payment information first. So remember, each time we're going to make sure that the payment was made within the month before we declare that the expense is allowable within that month. All right, so see you here. This is our check to Florida Blue for $1,490, and it is dated 10/1/2020. And it is in the memo section, notes that it is October 2020 coverage. All right, so now if you can pull up the Florida Blue invoice. Okay, so now we have a copy of the Florida Blue invoice. So the Florida Blue invoice has an invoice date. It has a billing period, which is what we'll be looking for. We want to make sure that the period that's covered is within the grant period. And if you note too, it also says that the amount due is $1,490, which was the same dollar amount as the check, which we'll also be, looking to ensure. All right, and if you'll go down to page 2, this is the billing detail that we were talking about. So if you notice, it notes each employee that is covered under this group plan, and it shows the amount that is paid for each employee for this period. So in calculating what the amount, that allowable amount that you can claim on the grant, you will take each employee's $745 and multiply them by that total percentage that we calculated earlier. So for Jamie, we said her total percentage would be 28.1.25. So you would take that percentage times the $745, and the total amount that would be allowable to claim on the grant for her for the health insurance is $209.53. For Tina, we calculated her average time for the month to be 31.25%. So we would take the $745 times the 31.25%, and we get a total of $232.81. So again, because that was grantee share, we're not going to record that on this, but I did want to walk through that calculation with you so you could see. And you would use that same type of calculation if you budgeted for dental insurance, if you budgeted for life insurance, retirement, just, any other short-term disability, any other type of policies that you included in that section. The only one it does not apply to is FICA, because FICA, you're already applying a percentage on the total payroll.
And Tracy, this is Audrey. I just want to let you know that if you, as an agency, end up pulling like your health insurance and you're listing multiple employees on it, like feel free to redact the people who aren't on the grant. We just need to see how many people. I don't need to know their names or any other of that like personal identifying information. Like you can easily redact that. Or same thing if you have to provide a credit card statement for your database. Like if there's other things on there that you don't want us to see or don't feel comfortable sharing to us, like please feel free to redact that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We don't need to be sharing all of that information if they are not covered on the grant. Thank you for that, Audrey. All right. So let's go ahead and pull up the retirement payment. All right, so that's the invoice. Okay, and here's a copy of a retirement payment. This is an online payment receipt. It gives you the account number information. It tells you the date the payment was made. It tells you how much the payment was. The settlement date for that payment, how it was paid, and gives you a confirmation number. This would be a good supporting documentation to document the proof of payment of retirement. Now, looking at this, you can see that the payment was initiated on November 6th and it was settled on November 7th. So because retirement for the month of October was paid for in the month of November, we cannot claim it on this invoice. It would have to be moved over to the November invoice. However, using the same percentages that we calculated originally based on the October time. Okay. All right. So there's also some information on Florida workers' comp. Workers' comp was also a grantee portion in this, so we're not going to record it in our PER, but I did want to provide you with a sample documentation and invoice for that as well, just so you can see. So again, this was a check payment to this company for $207. It was paid for on the month on October the 8th. So if it was in your budget for a reimbursable cost, we would be able to claim this on the October invoice. And again, you will, to calculate workers' comp, you're going to take the total payroll. Most workers' comp companies do a rate based on the total amount of payroll. So to calculate what workers' comp would be is you would take whatever that rate is that you're being charged times the amount of allowable payroll on the grant to get your claimable amounts. Okay. Will you go ahead and pull the invoice up as well? All right, and here was a sample invoice that was created. Gives you a statement date and invoice number, gives a policy number, and it gives the policy effective date. We're looking at all of that information because again, we want to make sure that it does fall within the contract period and that it does fall within the coverage period and the month that you're trying to claim it for. So if we're trying to claim October, we're going to want something that shows that it was something for October. In this case, the total was $207. We paid for the whole invoice, so it is all paid for that whole entire year. As you can also see, it's showing us what the rate is per $100 of payroll. This is something that we're going to want to see. So if you did put workers' comp as one of your claimable expenses, you will want to make sure that the portion of the invoice or declaration page from the policy also notes what that rate is, because when we get your invoice, we're not only looking for this proper supporting documentation, but we're also looking for the correctness of the calculations. And without those rates, we'll be unable to finalize that review without that information. Okay. All right, I know this is a lot of information and this is going to be recorded for you guys. And again, as I stated, we will be available for you to answer any questions anytime. Audrey as well. So let's go ahead and move on to section 3, database software. So there is an invoice and payment information for that as well, if you'll pull the payment. All right, so here's the payment information. Notes that we paid the fund software company $3,384. It was paid on October the 31st. And so as long as that amount matches what's on the invoice, then we are able to claim this, this expense on our October invoice. All right, and if we look at the invoice, so the invoice shows what we bought, that it was an annual subscription fee for 12 months. It told us that the period was December 1 through November 30th. And it as a unit price of $282 per month for a total of $3,384. So we see that the check amount matches the payment amount. We see that the period, and we see that the period is from December 1 to November 30th. That means because some of that is outside of your contract period, you cannot claim the full $3,384. What you would have to do is calculate the $282 times the number of months within this claimed period that you can claim on the grant. So with this starting for December and this grant ends September 30th, we can claim this for 2 months. So the total amount of this that we can claim is $2,820. Now, I know this is kind of pulling it back a little bit, but in the beginning, when we looked at your budget, the budget only budgeted a total of $1,028.75 for the database software. So because that was the total amount that you budgeted for, that is the total amount that you can claim from this, because that is what's in your approved budget. So going back to the PER form, the total amount that you will claim in section 3 under database software is $1,028.75. You pull up the PER form as well. There we go. Okay. And so now we are finished with putting together the invoice. As you'll note, the Excel spreadsheet has added everything together for you. So your total, and I'm trying to see the bottom there myself. Audrey, could you read that number out for us? Thank you.
$2,007.79.
That will be your total reimbursable invoice for the month of October. So what you will do is you will sign that. Again, we will take an electronic signature and a date. Please do not forget the date. That's just as important as the signature. You will put that together with all of the supporting documentation, and that is what you will submit to us. I hope you found this information to be helpful. I tried to bring out every little scenario that you could have and calculation. Again, I know that was a lot and a little bit of time. So again, it will be provided for you. But if you do ever have any questions or need assistance or not quite understanding, please reach out to us. And the sooner the better, because we can help you right away and we can get you moving in the right direction. Again, like Audrey said, and like Kalia said, it is our goal to get that money out the door. And we want you to spend it We want you to put this into your programs. We want you to put this back into your communities, and we're here to help you do that. Okay, Audrey, thanks.
Thank you. I do see that we have some questions that maybe we could cover. I just want to let everyone know that I was also doing this as Tracy was speaking. She didn't give me like the cheat sheet with the answers. So,
Nope.
I mean, I didn't do the physical math because she was talking about it on the call, but I think my invoice looks pretty good. So
Absolutely.
you know, as I was doing it, I was like, oh no, I don't know the right answer. But some people have been asking about the timesheet. I'll make sure to send that out first thing. Probably I can send tomorrow, and then I'll make sure to include it in the after action stuff as well. I do know that there is a PDF version on our website, and Lizzie has been posting as a session moderator where you can find that. Oops, okay. So this is a question. If we included less than the actual cost in the database example on our budget, do we submit the total cost, but we can only be reimbursed for an amount that's being budgeted, or do we adjust the calculation to meet the number in the budget?
So, of course, you do not want to go over the amounts already in your budget. So in our example, because we only budgeted $1,028, you saw that our allowable was $2,820. But you only budgeted for the $1,028. So that's all you can invoice us for. So you would use the lesser of the two. You're not going to tell us not put in the 2,800. The only time that could happen is say you get, halfway down and you realize maybe you put a little bit more money in personnel and realize that, hey, I don't think we're going to use that. And if you have a little bit of money left over and you know that you still had some of that database cost that was allowable that you could claim, but at that time you didn't budget it, we can allow you to put some of those funds there to cover the rest of that database software.
Yeah, and I think I would add, I think it was mentioned, but if you haven't purchased the database and it is in your budget to do so, we expect to see that purchase within the first few months because we expect that database to be a tool for this grant year. We don't want you to come to us September 30th of 2021 to say, I just purchased it, because the entire past year hasn't been used. So again, some of you probably already have something in mind, but for those of you who were like, I put it in because we're going to explore it if we get awarded, like now's the time to be researching it. We don't have a hard cutoff date, just because, everybody's different and the world is a little different right now. So it might take a little longer, but please do not wait until the end to purchase it because we won't allow it. And it's also great if you purchase it now and you're under budget, you can move the rest of those database costs into salary or benefits, which again, if you do it after June 1st, then you ideally don't have that money left to spend, right? Like you would be leaving some money on the table if your database ended up costing you much less than what you had anticipated. So if you have any questions, we don't have one that we would recommend. I do have a list of ones that past grantees have done and can connect you with some of those if you are interested. But definitely about the database, please be thinking about that now. Let's see if we have any other questions.
Great point, Audrey. Yes, thank you.
I'll wait just a few seconds to see if there's any more questions. And then before we go, if there are any questions that aren't finance related, but maybe about VGF in general, feel free to put those in the chat as well. I will say that we're here for you. You call the office, it goes to my phone here at my house. And then obviously email is the best way to get me and whatnot. And so, want to help you spend that money. That is really great on our end. And then I hope that this training was really great and that you've learned some stuff to help build your volunteer program. For all of you that are program people or the ones running the volunteers, you'll be seeing a lot more of me. We'll be setting up some Zoom webinars and chats and whatnot. Let's see. But before we go, I'd love to see people's just comments on how they're feeling after the end of the 3 days or end of the day, if this is your first and only session. How are you guys feeling? Like, put it in the chat, 1 word, 2 words, something that's not, you know, a paragraph. Just how you're feeling. All right, ready to rock. I know training is always so great. At the end, I feel so energized because I usually get to meet you all, and like I'm ready to go back to the office and get to work. Some people are putting a little nervous, but don't worry. Like I said, the first invoice is usually the toughest, and then it's smooth sailing from there. And then there are plenty of touch points throughout the year for me to make sure that we're on track financially and programmatic. But usually the recruitment of the volunteers comes very naturally, or is maybe easier for the organization. All right. Oh, excited about implementing the best practices they've learned about. That's great. And then I do see a question about, do we have, for you, Tracy, do we have a CFDA or CSDA number for this grant?
I do, and if you can get that that contact information, I can send that out to you.
Okay. All right, I will wait around just a few minutes if there's any more questions, but we will end early today. And then my hopes is you will exit out of this survey and you will go complete the session survey. It's called Know Your Grant, the Volunteer Generation Fund. I'd love the finance people to fill that out too. It will help us plan for future VGF trainings, whether it's virtual or in person. And then we also use it as part of our impact study. So any feedback that you have would be wonderful. So again, once you exit out of here, it'll ask like, are you leaving? You'll say, yes, I've completed the session. And then under the events tab, you will show, there'll be a pop-up for surveys. All right. Well, that's it. Everybody have a good Thursday and a happy weekend. For those of you that celebrate Halloween, hope that you get lots of candy and are staying safe.
Stay safe. Look forward to working with you all. Have a great day.